But speaking of new coaches, Steve Nash getting that job in Brooklyn, some people said it was really handed to him. So let's move on to this in coaches and how coaches get their jobs, and to be honest, the lack of black coaches in professional sports, and the lack of black coaches in college sports, and honestly, it can trickle down to even high school sports, sadly. And I mean, if you look at it, let's just look at college football. They did a study on college football most recently. You have 130 football bowl series teams, and you had at that time only 13 head black coaches. And I mean, just look at those numbers, and I think it's even dwindled more at this point with Mason getting fired at Vanderbilt and Kevin Sumlin getting fired at Arizona. So you arguably have only 11 black head coaches out of 130 in the football bowl series. In Division II, I'm sure the numbers are pretty reflective, and I'm sure they are going down the line. In high school, it's very similar. You might see maybe 10% of black head coaches. They're just not getting the opportunities. And then even in pro sports, you're seeing them not get the opportunity. Like a guy like Eric Bieniemy, who's the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, has deserved an opportunity and has yet to get that opportunity. You got guys in college football like Ivan Jasper, the offensive coordinator for Navy, and Brennan Marion, a wide receiver coach at Hawaii. Just offensively great minds that, could lead a program, great men of character that could lead a program. And they're just not getting the opportunity. And you have to ask why. And I hate to say it, but it looks like it's a form of systemic racism that's really hurting college sports. And I think it trickles down to, unfortunately, donors and money and, boosters, and who boosters want to have leading their program, or they're not going to be donating money. Or in some cases, even the president or the athletic director of these schools really not wanting to give a black coach a chance. But you do have some, and the ones that have given the chance have been rewarded. You look at Penn State with James Franklin running a great program. Maybe hasn't been too successful in the win column recently, but I know they're running a great program. You look out to Stanford on the West Coast with David Shaw running a great program. You got coaches like Willie Taggart in Florida now at FAU or FIU. No, it's FAU. I'm sorry. So, I mean, you do have some coaches out there that can prove to it, but it just seems like throughout history, these schools are looking to fill positional coaches such as the running back coach or the secondary coach. And you see a lot of them as positional coach, but you just don't see a lot of them as a head coach. And it's kind of disappointing to see. I'm not going to lie, Pat.
Yeah, I know. I think it's also, you can look at this almost like economics in our country, right? Is it a trickle down issue or is it a trickle up issue? And if it's a trickle up issue, then do you start at the high school level, and do you try to get more minority high school coaches, clinics and opportunities to really get into coaching so that they can rise up? Or is it at the NFL level where, you talk about the lack of black head coaches? I think there's only 3 in the NFL right now, and that could change because who knows what's going to happen with Anthony Lynn, the Chargers. Doesn't look good for him right now. But
doesn't look good.
You only have 2 black offensive coordinators. I think there's 10 minority defensive coordinators, but I think there's only 2, minority offensive coordinators in the NFL. So that's, does it start at the assistant coaching level? I think the NFL tried to institute, I think this might have even gone through, this rule where if you hire a minority head coach, you get an extra draft pick or something like that. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think you're forcing this to happen rather than just letting these coaches, get these jobs organically. But at the same time, I think it's more about opportunities. I think it's more about giving these coaches opportunities to work their way up and get coordinator positions and get positions in college. And as you mentioned, in high school, where they can really get good experience under their belt and then make their way up. Unfortunately, I think in college football, I think you're right. I think it's just where, depending on where you go, there's people that might not be comfortable with a minority head coach, and that's terrible and that's wrong. But I think it's the truth. Brian
Yep.
Shaw out in Stanford, I'm surprised he hasn't gotten a head coaching job in the NFL. He's been sought after for a long time. He probably loves it out in Palo Alto and just doesn't want to leave there. But
Do you blame him?
I don't blame him one iota. I think Bieniemy is going to get a head coaching job. I think the one thing with Eric Bieniemy is that his team's good every year, the Chiefs. So, once the season ends, one thing that I heard in a podcast recently was that a lot of times teams will interview a coach. Once the season's over, if you need a new head coach, you probably didn't make the playoffs. So you're looking at interviewing new head coaches right after week 17. If you're Eric Bieniemy, it's hard to institute an offensive game plan for a playoff game and then also get ready for a head coaching interview this year. That might change a little bit with Zoom and Skype and doing stuff virtually. That might actually level the playing field a little bit. But one thing I heard in the podcast was that, if you can't interview it in Eric Bieniemy until maybe 2 weeks after the season, there are some teams who will interview another coach from somewhere else and then say, well, he interviewed great. We don't want to lose him because he's going to interview for another team. So we're just going to hire him right now instead of taking the time to really find the right fit. So I think that's where a lot of these hires, have come from, where there are guys that just, probably weren't the right guy. And because they were worried they were going to lose that coach, and then you're going to end up with, a guy that you didn't want that was probably 5th or 6th on your list. You wonder if that happened in Cleveland with Freddie Kitchens. They had an interview with him. Maybe he did well in the interview, and they're like, we don't want to lose this guy. And then you look at some other guys that, you wonder how they didn't get head coaching jobs. I wonder if Bieniemy is not a great interviewer, but I can't see how. He's, very smart offensive coordinator, charismatic, and has been on a very successful team. You look at a guy like Brian Flores in Miami, who I could see totally killing it in an interview just by the way that, I know when he was the defensive backs coach for the Pats, they had him mic'd up a lot on the sidelines during the Super Bowl, and just hearing him, you could see that guys would want to play for him. So I think every coaching style is different and so forth, but I do wonder. I think the toughest part about answering this question is, where do we start? And I think the opinions vary on that.
Yeah, no, and to go back on what you said, I think the NFL, they had that as like an idea that they were thinking about instituting, but they did not institute that as far as getting the draft pick. They have the Rooney Rule, but it's been proven that teams are kind of just bouncing around the Rooney Rule and are getting by interviewing a coach, but really not having them in mind as one of their final candidates. So like you said, we do need something different. I'd like to see something expanded to give just more opportunity. And I think it just comes down to, I'd like to see it go back to, and a lot of people say this, hey, how about the right man for the right job? And in certain cases, I think it is going to be a black head coach. And if you look at the numbers, whether it be in the NCAA, NFL, NBA, you got NCAA, you got 60% of the athletes are African American. In the NBA and the NFL, you've got 70% of the athletes are African American. So I just think we just need a little bit more of a balance of black head coaches compared to 10%, compared to the 60 and 70% of the athletes. Maybe we need to get to the point where we're at like 40 to maybe even a 50-50 call at this point. And yeah, it's just like you said, how do we get to that point? And I think certain stuff comes up where how Steve Nash got his job. That's why people will continue to ask about this. Where you've got some NBA coaches that, kind of got overlooked for that job. And Steve Nash had no coaching experience and then just gets it automatically off his playing experience. Don't get me wrong, Hall of Fame player, one of my favorites. But that's just, it's odd. It's odd to say the least. But, it's definitely something I think that we can, come back to going forward throughout the season. Because like you said, after this week, we're going to see possibly some additional coaches either get dispatched in the NFL. Anthony Lynn might be one of them. But we also might see some other coaches getting dispatched. Like I know Adam Gase has already been told he's going to get fired by the Jets. So you might get some opportunities that might open up for some other coaches. So, yeah, I think this is a topic that we'll definitely have to come back to, Pat, and maybe in the future down the line. But I think this has been a great show, Pat. For our first show, we really covered all the topics. And I thank everybody for tuning in. And like I said, give us a follow. Give us a subscribe, shoot us a like. Follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle's at the bottom. And like I said, I really had a lot of fun tonight, Pat. You did a great job.
Thank you so much. I had a blast as well. We are going to visit that last topic again. I'm sure, like you mentioned, as coaches lose their jobs and gain jobs in the NFL and in the NBA, we can talk about that more as well, too, because I think that's going to be a topic of conversation in sports for a long time. But, hey, I had a blast this week. I hope everybody who's watching at home had a good time. We covered a lot. We talked a lot. We had a lot of topics to cover, a lot of great ideas. If you want to make some comments on the YouTube page, or if you want to tweet at us and give us topic ideas that you want us to talk about, or if you want to comment on how we did in this first episode, make sure you do that. Like Brandon said, our Twitter handles are on the bottom of the page. And I think this is a great episode, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in to Comeback Sports. This is our first edition. We're going to try to
come back and come back often.
Exactly. Come back every Wednesday. We're going to try to do it every Wednesday right around 8 o'clock as we did tonight. We might be a couple minutes past, just depending on how technology works, because we're all using this technology now, whether we like it or not. So it's going to be very interesting going forward in a brand new year, 2021, where everybody's going to be doing fun stuff, because 2020, we are so happy that's going to be behind us in the next couple of days. But folks, thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time here on Comeback Sports. Happy New Year,
2021.
everybody.